Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? When I was in junior high school, my English teacher told me a story about when he was in college. And one of his professors wrote on the blackboard, "Why?" question mark. And that was the assignment. And so he and the rest of the class began furiously scribbling on their papers about this esoteric question and man's search for meaning and anything else they could think of, page after page, trying to impress the professor. But one student wrote something down on their paper in a couple minutes, threw it on the professor's desk, and walked out. That was the only student that got an A. And what they wrote down was, "Why not?" That made me chuckle because, yes, that's being a bit of a wise ass. But when the question is asked openly like that, that's the best answer. Now, if you're a parent, you probably remember that moment when you wish that word was stricken from the English language because your children continue to ask why every 5 minutes, and you're finally just saying, "This is because this is the way it is, because I said so. Please do anything else but ask me another question." But that inquisitiveness, that question, is part of what makes us human. It's one of the most important parts of what makes us human, in my estimation. Asking why, it's the root of all innovation, of all creativity, of science, and of progress. And we are wired to observe, to question, and understand, and make sense of the world, not just by observing it, but by questioning, by figuring out what's really going on. Those people way back when they finally didn't have to work every single second of their life said, "What is stuff? And why does it do what it does?" And chemistry was born, and physics started to be, was born as well. Without asking why, we cannot really, solve problems or improve systems, because we just kind of blindly go on without, innovating in any way. However, it doesn't take very long before we're told to stop asking questions. That curiosity is suppressed. And I am just as guilty as anybody else telling my kids, "Hey, stop it." But it's not just from parents. It's from society. It's from our peers. As we grow, we're told, to stop asking questions, and we're giving life formulas. Go to school, go to work, consume, repeat, all that kind of stuff that you can see in the movie They Live. Go watch that movie if you've never watched that. And when you question these models, these belief systems that we've been given, then you get mocked. And I remember getting mocked by the other children in school when I would ask that. "You're making waves, you're making trouble." And it certainly happens as adults, where the rest of the crowd, kind of picks on you. And if you're making those waves and asking those questions, in many cases, in work, in organizations, you get shut down. You get shut down pretty hard. But the consequences of no longer being inquisitive, with no longer questioning why we do things, why are things the way we are, why are we doing it this way, why aren't we doing it this other way, all that kind of stuff. We walk through life blindly. We're just repeating the same patterns without meaning. We adopt beliefs, we adopt routines and activities without really understanding, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? I don't know if I shared it in another video, but the idea of cutting off the ends of the roast because, your mother did it, and her mother did it, and her mother did it, and you finally get to the great-grandmother and say, "Well, I had to. My pan was too small." We carry on these traditions without ever really questioning, why the hell are we doing this in the first place? And we lose our sense of purpose and agency when we just go on blindly following what everybody else tells us to do. And personally, every time I found myself in a situation where I stopped asking why, whether it was in a job, whether it was with my experience with religion, whether it was, involvement in some kind of organization, whatever it happened to be, or just following the life pattern that somebody told me, "This is what you should be doing." When I stopped asking why, when I started becoming more dogmatic, I felt like I was dying inside. I realized slowly the part of me that makes me me, or one of the biggest parts that makes me Ivan, was being strangled to death, was being drowned. And that was a horrible feeling to no longer do that. The seeker in me went completely dormant, because I'm a seeker of truth. I'm a seeker of what's really going on, what's really happening. And when I suppress that, when that goes dormant or starts to die, I start to die with it. And I start to become a very inauthentic person. I don't know if you can relate to that, but that's, a big thing for me. And so, there's things like, listen, I'm not saying that, you should view everything with suspicion. Like, I trust science because science is based on questioning and evidence, and constantly questioning and constantly refining those models. I do not extend this same grace to corporations or politicians or any kind of systems, built on self-interest, including, salespeople. And when the why is silenced, when you're told not to question, just to obey, just to do what somebody tells you to do, usually somebody's hiding something. And my BS meter starts going off pretty loudly at that moment. There's a famous quote by John D. Rockefeller. And I remember hearing this quote for the first time and I was appalled. And the quote is, he said, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers." And that to me is one of the most offensive lines that any human being has ever said. That's horrible. To me that's a mockery of what it means to be human. And that's demoting everybody else to, service animals, to being domesticated cattle. And that's not what we are. We are human beings. We are not merely cogs in somebody's machine that it's supposed to, work obediently. I'm not going to be one of those cogs, if you know what I mean. And, it's just offensive. It promotes obedience over understanding. And, at the end of the day, asking why is not just defiance. It's your birthright. It's part of what makes you and I human, which makes us a little bit different than the other animals that simply go upon observation. We get to question. We get to innovate. It's how we grow. It's how we create. It's how we remain fully human. That is how all of the advances personally and in our cultures and as a species are made. Is somebody asked why? Why we do it? Is there a better way to do this? Why does this work this way? Let me take a look. Hey, maybe we can do it this other way. So to me, the most important thing to do, or one of the most important things to do in life, is never stop asking why. Never lose that sense of curiosity, of wonder, and of investigation into all facets of life. Other people, the way the world works, systems, groups of people, politics, the whole 9 yards. And because there's very many questions you can ask why about your own life. Why do I do things the way I do? Is there a better way for me to navigate life? These are the really important questions. And, but it's going to go against what society tells me to do, or what, too bad, because this is your life. This is my life, not somebody else's life. You know what I mean? So I'm going to be a thinker, not an obedient worker. What about you?